In an extraordinary year of elections, the first in Europe takes place in Finland. Questions around security and defence are top priorities following Russia's war in Ukraine. So, will Finland continue to be the West's buffer against Russia after the polls? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. European elections last year suggested a significant shift to the right as Finnish voters head to the polls. Are they likely to continue that trend?
A cold time to campaign, but Finns are spoiled for choice as they get ready to elect a new president. 9 candidates are standing, 1 from each national party and 2 independents. The latest polling shows centre-right Alexander Stubb in the lead, followed by Liberal Green Party member Pekka Haavisto. Stubb served as Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, but he's been absent from Finnish politics for 7 years, working first at the European Investment Bank and then at an Italian university. Haavisto is on the other side of the political spectrum, representing the Greens, and is Europe's first openly gay politician. His most recent job was as Foreign Minister, a critical role when Finland joined NATO in 2023.
Actually, you join a new club, you think that you listen what people have to say, but they come to you and ask how Finland analyzes Russia and the future of Russia, how Finland analyzes the security situation around the Baltic Sea. We have to have our own analysis also in good shape when we are joining the new club.
Regional security and European integration are important issues for Stubb as well.
We're a member of NATO, and of course with the aggressive war that Russia is waging in Ukraine, we are entering a new era. This will be the first Finnish NATO president, a Western president in many ways.
Finland's presidential powers pale in comparison to parliament's, but the president is responsible for foreign policy and heads the Finnish defence forces. If neither candidate receives more than 50% of the vote, a runoff will be held in February, so it's likely the top 2 candidates will have a second chance to make a good impression.
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining me from the Finnish capital, Helsinki, is Henri Vanhanen, a research fellow at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Shea is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary General of NATO. He joins us from Brussels. And here with me in the studio is Lembit Opik. He is a former UK Member of Parliament with the Liberal Democrat Party and a former chair of the UK's all-party parliamentary group on Estonia. Henri, I want to come to you first. When we talk about elections in any country, the economy is always to the front. It's the main talking point. In Finland, security, understandably, is of great concern.
Well, that is, of course, the case ever since the Russian invasion of 2022. But I would say that also in the Finnish presidential election, you have to look at the constitutional powers and tasks that are demanded from the president. And that is clearly security, defense, and foreign policy. So it's not a really economic-related position. So therefore, obviously, the discussions will be and have been revolving around Russia, Ukraine, Finland's NATO membership, these type of topics.
And Henri, when you're talking to fellow Finns and indeed people who are out polling and knocking on doors and canvassing for political parties, how often is security coming up as an issue?
Well, traditionally, Finland has been a more or less consensus-based society when it comes to security and defense solutions of the country. For example, before the invasion in 2022, support for NATO membership wasn't really that significant in Finland, but a couple of weeks after the attack took place in February 2 years ago, the support for NATO membership jumped up to 50, and now it's already up to 80%. So usually security is not a topic that is the main concern of elections. Obviously, the circumstances right now have defined and contributed to the fact that this is the case right now. But when it comes to the president, obviously his position is very I would say, defined by security and defense-related topics. So obviously this is a big issue right now for Finns.
Jamie, are the Finns right to be concerned about the neighbour they have on their doorstep?
Well, just a couple of days ago in Stockholm, the current Finnish Prime Minister Orpo said that Finland did not see an immediate, I quote, military threat from Russia. That may well be the case, but the Russians have not reacted as you could predict very favourably to Finland joining NATO. Putin has made a few sort of threats to sort of put more Russian troops and Russian military bases up on the very long 1,200-kilometre border between Finland and Russia. But of course, the Russians are very much bogged down in Ukraine. So how quickly and how much can they do that? We'll wait and see. But there have been problems. I mean, the Russians have been pushing illegal migrants over the border into Finland. The Finns have had to sort of fence some of the border. There's been some sabotage incidents at the end of last year regarding gas cables, telecoms cables running between Finland and Estonia. Indeed, Finland for some time has been used to what we would call hybrid warfare tactics from Russia, interference with GPS signals, cyber attacks, that kind of thing. Finland even plays host to an EU-NATO Centre of Excellence on hybrid warfare in Helsinki. So I think that, no immediate alarm. Finland is in NATO, of course, now, covered by NATO protection. But there, of course, are going to be consequences. The relationship with Russia is not what it was just a couple of decades ago. And the Finns, of course, also now have not only got to protect themselves, but protect other NATO countries too. So they've taken on a lot more responsibility.
Lembit, just for anyone watching, your family background, both your parents are Estonian, a lot of similarities. You've got a border with Russia. Are the Finns right to be very concerned about their neighbour?
Yes, but not about the military side. Let's be honest. If Finland was invaded, even before the NATO change, it would essentially have been a declaration of war against Europe and European Union. And it would have been an intolerable pressure on the West. They'd have had to respond. So I don't see the Russians physically invading. But the history from Estonia is slightly different. As has just been pointed out, a cyber attack is quite straightforward. Estonia was the first nation to be brought to a standstill by a cyber attack. And there's a lot of expectation that that was by Russia, by Moscow. And somehow Estonia has managed to have an uneasy truce and quite a profitable economic relationship with Russia. If Russia wants to cause trouble for Estonia, all it has to do is turn off the economic tap. It's a bit different with Finland. But once again, I think the real threat here is a kind of covert disruption, like the illegal immigrants coming across, and just the business which does happen between Finland and Russia. So in summary, I don't see a hot war occurring here, but I can see trouble brewing, and Russia's in a much stronger position to cause trouble for Finland due to a matter of size.
So it could be a cyber attack, for example, on maybe the infrastructure in Helsinki.
Yes, and that can't be stopped by having a fence along the border. And it can't easily be stopped with cybersecurity, because if you have the disposal of the entire superpower, Russia, and all the time and all the resources, if you really want to attack a country, you can do it, as Estonia experienced, especially its banking sector.
Henry, one of the leading candidates is Alex Stubb. He's fervently pro-Europe. What more can you tell us about him?
Well, Mr. Alexander Stubb, he is a long-time experienced political figure, a member of the national coalition parties of the center-right party, a moderate right-wing party in Finland, which is currently also running the government. Stubb is a former prime minister, former foreign minister, former minister for trade and development aid, and also former minister of finance, so a very seasoned politician. And ever since he announced his candidacy late last year, he's been surging in the polls. But I would say that there are also, because we are currently getting closer to the first round of the elections, which is this Sunday. And the latest polls that just came out 2 days ago indicate that also the sort of more right-leaning candidate, more of the radical right-leaning candidate, Mr. Jussi Halla-aho, former chair of the Finns party and also the current speaker of the Finnish Parliament, is also rising in the ranks. We have Mr. Pekka Haavisto, former foreign minister, also as a second in the poll. So it's going to be a very tight race about who gets to the second round. But I would say that at this point, certainly these candidates, they represent different political homes and parties and affiliations. But when it comes to security and defense, like I mentioned before, Finland has a tradition of being I would say, more or less sort of homogeneous when it comes to these issues. So this is not an election of the big sort of foreign policy line that Finland is about to draw. Finland has joined NATO. All candidates support NATO membership and understand the challenges that, for example, Russia is currently posing for Finland's security. So this is more of a personality election, I would say.
Jamie, the front runner, Stubb, he has been out of politics for 7 years. He's been away in Brussels. He's been a very busy man, but not in frontline Finnish politics. Do you think that matters to an electorate, that a guy has not been, on their TV screens every day working in domestic politics?
Well, given his lead, as Henry has just very eloquently described in the opinion polls, it would suggest no. The Finns also have a tradition of having in their politics also great international statesmen and women who go out and serve in the UN or other international organisations for long periods of time and who still come back. That's not the case in British politics, for example, or in many other countries. I was thinking, for example, of somebody like Martti Ahtisaari, who was a UN Undersecretary for many years. So Stubb has got a high profile, as Henry just said, and believe it or not, he's one of the few candidates in a presidential election that I can claim to know personally because he's been around Brussels for many years in the European Parliament, for example, London School of Economics in the academic world too. So he's the intellectual type, but he's got a high profile, a good track record. And I think that, he's saying all of the right things. Interestingly, as somebody coming from a very EU type of background, he's suggesting that NATO needs to be a little bit more European and the Europeans need to increase their defence self-reliance. So he's got some new ideas as well as sort of hewing to the current line of Finnish foreign policy. So no, I don't think it's going to be a disadvantage. I think the Finns sort of, like having prominent international statespeople on their international stage, and they don't punish them in their domestic politics, unlike so many other countries.
Lembit, that's a very good point, isn't it? I just couldn't imagine an election in the UK, for example, if somebody hadn't worked domestically for 7 years, hadn't been around Westminster and suddenly was up for the big job. That's just not going to happen in the UK, is it?
It just has. We've got lots of comeback kids. David Cameron, who left in disgrace, essentially.
But he's not leading the country.
No, but he's very close to the top. He may not have been elected, but he's very close to the top. So the precedent is set that comeback kids can hold very senior office. Another comeback kid is Donald Trump. He's arguably never really been in proper politics, but he's incredibly popular. So I think that the debate here is about personalities. I think that the point homogeneous foreign policy is pretty much right. I've never made a secret of the fact that I might actually stand for president of Estonia. One reason I've got the citizenship. And I asked myself, what would I stand for? I wouldn't expect much differentiation between myself and other candidates about the relationship with Russia. You have to be very diplomatic about it. I think that both Finland and Estonia are being pushed into being rather more belligerent than they would like to be. But it's about who you feel should lead the country. I think that's a precedent in Estonia and also in Finland from past experience.
So you think this need not necessarily be in any way a disadvantage to Stubb?
In my personal view, it's actually an advantage because he can say he's got a stake in the game of ordinary people. The worst thing that's happened in Western politics is having career politicians who don't look like they understand the problems of the people that they serve. Stubb can actually say he's been out there. OK, he's been pretty successful as well. But he can say, I've swum up the river with you. I've experienced the economic problems. Sure, I've done diplomatic things too, but I'm not a one-trick pony. And I think that gives him more depth than his opponents.
Thanks, Lembit. Henry, I want to talk about Pekka Haavisto. What can you tell us about him? I read he is the leading Green candidate. He is also openly gay, and he came second in 2 recent elections. Is this third time lucky for Pekka?
Indeed, Mr. Haavisto is a long-time Finnish politician, also very seasoned. He was a minister in a government in the 1990s, and he's the sort of founder of the Finnish Green political movement. And indeed, he was the foreign minister in the previous Finnish government that took Finland to NATO, and so he was very involved with the process of negotiating with NATO members about Finland's NATO membership and accession. I would say that this is his third time running. So the first time was 2012, then 2018, and now 2024. And for a long time, he was sort of the front runner in the polls, considered the one that would this time win the elections. But he's been in the top 2 for, I would say, most of the time in the polls, and he still is there as number 2. And so he's sort of likely to become the left sort of political candidate, because right now it's going to be a very tight race who will get to the second round. And it seems that the Social Democratic or the Left Alliance candidate does not stand a chance. And there's also the problem that they might not even get Haavisto to the second round. So I think they would all have to rally behind Haavisto to get him as this sort of a left-leaning candidate to the second round. But Haavisto, indeed, he's been representing more of this, I would say that his sort of personal ambitions are in development issues, Africa, peace mediation. That is his profile. He's not a hard security NATO profile per se, but obviously he has the experience from the previous government. But he is one of the candidates that is considered likely to be at the second round.
Jamie, this is a big role. It's a 6-year term being president of Finland, chief of the defence staff, leader of the country. It's not in any way a figurehead position, is it? This is absolutely on the front line. You know, this is a big, big decision for the people of Finland.
Well, absolutely, because many European countries have presidents who are distinguished individuals, but who are mainly occupying kind of ceremonial function, at least in normal times, except when there's a constitutional crisis or something like that. And of course, power is really in the hands of the Prime Minister and the government. But as was been said, Finland is slightly different in the sense the president has a real job in terms of conducting foreign policy. He's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He shows up, or he or she, because not maybe this time round, but in future there could well be a she, turns up at NATO and other meetings to speak on behalf of the country. So the job does carry a little bit more sort of full-time employment and gravitas. And so it is an important job, and you've got the person for 6 years. So it's important to have the right choice. And Finnish presidents often have punched above their weight, to use an expression on the international stage. For example, the outgoing president, Haavisto, who served 2 terms, was somebody who was very appreciated when I was at NATO, because he made big efforts at a time when we still thought it was possible to build bridges between NATO and Russia. And he used to invite NATO and Russia to gatherings to try to sort of sort out issues of military stability, transparency, avoiding dangerous incidents at sea and in the air in the Baltic states. Now, as we know, the Finnish-Russia relationship doesn't really allow that any longer. But Finland is a country, a bit like Sweden and some of the other Scandinavians, where often the president can take big international initiatives, act as a convener, bring the sides together, and so on. So it's not just important for Finland's role, at least domestically, but I think internationally as well. And indeed, to some degree, I admire Finland, because we have so many elections where, frankly, the choice of candidates is not always ideal. Populists with little experience, rabble-rousers, people with very marginal sort of role on the world stage. But the Finns are spoilt for choice, because they've not only got 2 outstanding front runners who have got lots of foreign policy credibility, but people like Olli Rehn. I mean, he doesn't seem to stand a chance of getting to the second round, but he's a former central bank governor, a former EU commissioner, and the like. I mean, I would love to live in many countries where you could have so many prominent individuals vying to be head of state. So good on Finland.
Lembit, a 6-year term, that's quite a stretch, isn't it? I mean, you can get a lot done politically.
Yes, and what you have to remember is the whole of Baltic politics is pragmatic, much more than in the UK, where you have a big ceremonial side to it. So everybody who's in politics has to play a part. And the countries are comparatively small, so you don't have time for all the pomp and circumstance. Secondly, the Baltic has had centuries of invasion and coexistence with huge, huge partners that they can either live with or suffer from. And here's a third point, which people aren't talking about, but I'll put it out there. If we're still in a conflict situation between the West and Russia in 6 years' time, that will have been an international relations catastrophe with death and massive economic problems. So I assume we will get out of it. That's when Finland, and actually the other countries in that area, begin to come into their own. So you want to have a president who can occupy the stage that you described, somebody who can be an intermediary, because for all of their working lives, the Baltic states, including Finland, have to live between 2 massive partners, Europe and to some extent America and Russia. And it all works well when that relationship is lubricated by those very savvy politicians.
So, to sum up, this is a huge decision for the people of Finland. It's right, they get it right.
It's absolutely essential that they get someone who can keep the ship steady now at a time of stress, but then play a part when that stress is gone. I'm an optimist. We will fix the problems one way or another on the other side of that continent, actually not far away from there. But when this works well, Finland stands tall because it's got the right people to talk to both sides when those both sides aren't actually talking to each other.
Thanks, Lembit. Henri, I notice recently Pekka Haavisto said in Finland that he wants to remove hate speech from the public debate. We think of Finland, I can't ever see those words in the same sentence, Finnish people and hate speech. Just give us some of the background to what he meant there. I mean, is Finland a racist society?
I think that's a very broad subject. I would just say that, you know, there's a reason why candidates bring up these issues as well, because in Finland, the people expect that the president, even though his domestic powers have been reduced significantly since the Cold War days, when we had a very strong president, even domestically, in domestic affairs, the people still expect the president to be a leader when it comes to values and the other societal topics, even though he or she does not really have political power to more than agenda setting or to lose the sort of respect of the institution to steer the discussion into a certain direction. But I would say that these topics, like, for example, that you just mentioned by Haavisto, I think there's been more or less an issue in the elections here, that the candidates agree so much on the key issues on foreign security and defense policy that they will have to try to distinguish themselves with other initiatives like this one.
Jamie, what do we make of the Finns party? I mean, they've gained a lot of traction, labelled as a far-right party. You know, is there a worry in Brussels that perhaps they will poll more? I see they're at 17% at the moment. I mean, what are people telling you in the corridors of power? What would they like to see happen in Finland?
Well, I would not create, I don't think, any shockwaves if I say that Brussels would rather have one of these seasoned pro-Europe, pro-Atlanticist, pro-NATO politicians, that the people that we've been talking about thus far. But every European country, everyone has its sort of populist party or its populist faction. And with so many elections going on and a more diverse political scene, it's inevitable that they're going to be more populist candidates. And certainly, from what I see, I'm not like Henri with a ringside seat in Helsinki, but you know, people like Jussi Halla-aho do seem to have a lot of support among young people. That's a bit counterintuitive, right? Because normally you would expect some of the populists to appeal mainly to the conservative, sort of older status quo type of generation, very fearful of the future, fearful of immigrants. And it's interesting to see that this person is picking up support among young people and has about 20% of support among young people, compared with 21% for Alex Stubb. So I think that's something that should cause Brussels' sense of reflection. It could also be the fact that if you have an election with so many consensus candidates who are all saying, we agree, you know, on traditional foreign policy and that's what we're going to continue, that could be a bit boring for the younger generation, who may then like a bit more spice as provided by the Finns party. But it looks, at least, although this candidate is up in the opinion polls, that it's still going to be a choice between Haavisto and Stubb when it comes to the second round. So Brussels may not have to worry too much about that, and could probably think about some more serious situations like the rise of the AfD right-wing party in Germany, for instance.
Lembit, the border with Russia remains closed. We're told it will be closed until February 11th at the very earliest. I mean, this is obviously a major issue for the incoming president in the in-tray.
Yes, but there isn't much differentiation between the candidates, as myself and my colleagues have said. So, as you've already heard, they're looking for other differentiation. And I think that there are two areas which can help the right. First of all, a dissatisfaction with the European Union, where it's felt like they're imposing their will too much. You can see that's driving the growth of the right in other countries. And secondly, I make a prediction, the green agenda is beginning to practically affect people's lives. It's all very well until people have to make big sacrifices in their lives.
It's needed, isn't it?
Well,
the state of everything.
I don't think so. I have a very strong view that this whole thing is a false prospectus about the environment. But whether I'm right or not, there's no doubt that millions of people across Europe are saying, we don't want you to take our car away. We don't want you to take our freedom of travel away. We don't want to have power cuts. They're beginning to feel the pain. Finland's the same, and it isn't obliged to worship at the altar of the Greens. That's why I don't think the Greens will be very effective the Green will be very effective in this election. So if you add all that together, we've talked about the personalities, that's very important. We've talked about foreign policy, which is about the same. And that's when the right can actually say, we will stand up against the European Union, we will maintain the Finnish identity. That's important in Estonia too. And equally importantly, I think people say, well, we're pulling our part in the green agenda here, but life's expensive enough here as it is. And the candidate that says a pragmatic approach, a common sense approach to those things will probably get the quiet vote from people who might not want to say they're sceptical, but they can vote in private in the ballot box. And that could ultimately be the decider in a close race.
Henri, final question to you. Give us your prediction. What's going to happen in Finland?
If I'm not going to give a prediction on who is most likely to win, I would say that most people would not have to, when they think about what happens to Finland after the election, you shouldn't worry about it. I mean, the big issues are very much being agreed upon, being active in NATO, taking care of our national defense, contributing to NATO and EU in a positive way. I would say this is not an election about the big policy decisions that Finland has taken or solutions that's going to be ahead of us. There's a very broad consensus around them. I would say this is more about an election of continuum to find a president that can continue the good work that has been done for the last 12 years by Mr. Sauli Niinistö. And I think that this is a good sign for our allies and others who are looking at the Finnish election right now.
Henri, Jamie and Lembit, thank you all so much for your contribution. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World and hit that subscribe button if you like what you've heard. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.